Welcome to Puck Talk CS. Bike always ready to go.
Sorry.
Obviously, we're back to talk about arguably the second most important departure to the club in the last 20 years outside of Henrik Lundqvist. Steve-O, Mike, it's good to see you guys again. Weather's finally warming up for our Jersey, New York folks. As you know, it's been rainy pretty much every weekend of 2025. And that bodes pretty much, I guess it compares pretty much to the Rangers season. And now that the hockey season ended last night, we'll provide some Stanley Cup thoughts. And of course, we're going to dive into the chunk of this episode dedicated to Chris Kreider and the state of the Rangers. So, guys, it's good to see you, and I'm glad to get back on a roll here.
Yeah, so listen, let's do it. Let's talk some puck. And now off season officially starting with the Florida Panthers winning the Stanley Cup again. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Quick thoughts.
Well, what's up, everybody? I love it. I mean, on one hand, let me backtrack here. On one hand, I love the build of their roster. I absolutely love that they are the. Everybody called them like boring hockey, like Carolina was, but unlike Carolina, they score 5 goals. So they'll shut your superstars down, and then they'll just absolutely rip apart your goalie. And that's a really great build of the team. Do I like how many rats they have? Not when we're playing them, but I do love kind of the style of play. And do I love that they're in Florida? No, but I love that a team with that build is kind of bringing back gritty hockey. It's the motto.
Yeah, Steve, I'm sure you kind of feel the same way. Like, it was truly great hockey. You can't complain about the final matchup for a rematch. So many small storylines between players that were traded. You have the greatest player in the world. Arguably, I would argue that the majority feels the same way, that it's the best team in hockey, the Florida Panthers. Like you mentioned, Mike, Florida dominance. Bill Zito has built a roster and really has the Midas touch with acquiring some players. A lot of the players were traded or signed, not drafted. So that's a pretty interesting touch. I think it showed that a player like Bobrovsky, you pay your goaltender. And that's kind of fluctuated the last few years. We talked about this before we hopped on, Mike. Like, player like Binnington making league minimum out of the AHL to a guy making 10 mil backstopping championships within the last decade. So I think there's a lot to unpack with that. If it weren't for the fact that such a major piece of the Rangers was traded, I'd love to dive into more, but I feel like for our loyal listeners, it's more about that right now. But Steve, I do want to hear some of your thoughts about the finals.
Yeah, I think I want to highlight what Mike said. I think you watch a team like Florida, and you really, appreciate how good they are. And, you kind of compare it to the Rangers, and the Rangers are nowhere near built that the Florida Panthers are. So that just shows us that Jury has a lot of work to do, retooling, rebuilding, whatever the hell you want to call it. I think acquiring Miller, was a good start, but, just like some of the Panthers' best forwards, Miller straight ahead, no nonsense, skilled, kind of want to change that culture, kind of, fills that out. But I think what I appreciate from the Panthers, and this is the last thing I got here, is, the Panthers and how they activate their defensive men to play big roles in the transition and offensive aspects in the attack. That is something that I, while watching the Stanley Cup, really appreciated. And I really wish that we played similar to that, but unfortunately, we are a long way from that. Our defensive corps is far less active, it's far less physical, and it's prone to a lot more mistakes. So that's something we need to get better on if we want to play like that. But aside from that, if you boys don't have any other thoughts, let's bring these tissues out.
No, the Chris Kreider funeral.
Yeah, let's kick it off, man. I mean, 31 teams are trying to build the way the Florida Panthers are built, and that's no question. They've certainly set the bar. And I think it's no question that this move is a part of that for the Rangers organization. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, I think Kreider spanned the competitive window of Henrik Lundqvist's career and the competitive window of this Panarin era post rebuild quasi era, right? So to see him go hurts a lot. He leads the club in most stat categories, if not top three, if not top 10. Outside of the numbers, uh, I'd love to start by talking a little bit about kind of the Duck side, right? They had all that cap room. They already had Ranger players. Joel Quenneville sounded like he was a major factor in the decision for Kreider based on what Kreider said in that Ducks interview with their in-house podcast. I think it's going to be interesting because the Ducks are in an extremely competitive division because a lot of those teams are desperate. And I think the Rangers were a team, and I know this is where Steve-O is not going to like what I'm going to have to say. Like, the Kreider trade was totally a cap dump. I think the Zuccarello trade, when you're comparing a fan favorite, that was solely for, like, the principle of rebuilding. I think this is solely for the principle of, like, you move Trouba's entire contract and Kreider's entire contract. The same general manager takes it on because he can, and he's looking to get more competitive. Coaches want players, they don't want prospects. And for the Rangers, their return, I just don't think anyone's ever going to look at the return if they sign competitive players in a few weeks from now on July 1st. So, Steve, I have a feeling that's where I know going back and forth with you, that's probably where we disagree. But I want to hear your guys' thoughts on kind of the Duck side of things first before we really dive into the Rangers part.
Sure, Mike, guest of honor, you're up.
All right. Well, from the Duck side of things, I mean, it's a great their goal right now, like you're saying, Shives, is to be competitive. I mean, they really haven't been competitive the last couple of years. And
6 seasons since they made the playoffs, by the way. Just want to add that in.
Right. And their big thing, especially with the way that the league operates now, is hitting that cap floor. Like that's the reason why they're taking on all Kreider's cap, all of Trouba's cap, is they're trying to reach that floor. We'll also get some guys that, not to say that Trouba or Kreider reclamation projects, but you never know. Like Ryan Strome has been pretty sturdy for them. I wouldn't say that he's, an all-star, but he's doing perfectly fine with them. And I think that they think, well, if we can take on those contracts, hit the cap floor, and get some pretty good guys for not much in return, they're gonna, or at least going toward the Rangers' way. Then I think it's a very smart move on their part. Steve, what you got?
Oh, well, on the Duck side of things, we'll save the Ranger side of things for a bit. I like it. Anaheim is clearly buying low here in this position. I understand why they did so. They have a lot of very good young talent, and I think McTavish, when you go up and down the lineup, all the young players they have, they could be fantastic in the coming years, and we got a glimpse of that, for the last 2 seasons. But they do need some veteran guidance, and I think when you enter Kreider in there, I think it's perfect for them. He's obviously not going to score 52 goals like he did a few seasons ago. I don't even think he's going to have 80 plus points that he had. What was it, 2 years ago? But still,
77, I think,
something around there. But even if they could get Kreider, and Kreider had his, I think, one of the worst years statistically this past season in his career, and obviously things were trending down. But when you think about it, the Rangers were so broken during the end of November, the whole month of December. You had Kreider there playing on a broken team. Rangers didn't have JT Miller. I think if the Rangers had JT Miller, Kreider's numbers could statistically be a little bit better. But even if the Ducks get Kreider back to around 20 goals, 40, 45 points, even if he plays, a more reserved role on their second or even their third line, I think he offers a lot of flexibility for them, depending on where they want to move him in the lineup. I like it. I think it makes sense. It makes sense for the Ducks, and it really can't hurt. Again, it's just buying low here, and I think I'm not sure. I don't think the Ducks are quite ready for to compete for playoffs yet, but their goal is to be better than they have been in previous years. It's baby steps, and I think I like the move for the Ducks.
And Anaheim's really starting to turn into the Rangers' graveyard now. They got
Yeah.
Kreider, Trouba, Strome, Petrano. Who's next? Zibanejad?
I wouldn't count that out, but also the reports from Brooks more recently are that there's a lot more to the Zibanejad conversation than just that he has the no move. But something else I wanted to add. One, I think Verbeek, he needs this. He needs the playoffs. Like 2018, it's been a while since they've been in it. So, I think he's going to do everything he can. He still has, I think, upwards of 28 mil to spend. That's a lot. That's plenty. And obviously, we know he just took on Trouba's contract and Kreider's contract and still has that much space. Second, this is big, and I want to pivot this kind of into the Rangers' direction. Kreider averaged 17 minutes, and 5 of those minutes were on the penalty kill or power play last season. So when we're talking about what it is for the Rangers moving forward, that's a major consideration because he turned into a premier penalty killer from 2021-22 onward. And obviously he didn't earn the moniker Mr. Power Play Goal for nothing. So I think that's going to be a major factor. The other factor is that I think there's an opportunity to replace what he kind of lacked the last 2 seasons, 5-on-5. But let's start with maybe the nostalgia factor first before we get into the nuts and bolts here. For you guys, obviously I could speak for myself. Kreider was like, I remember first jersey on Christmas. He was at the training camps. I had the chance to play like alongside him. He joked around with the campers there. And then I got the chance to cover him as a veteran where he was more of a reserve guy. Like even Vince said on his podcast, he wasn't a guy he necessarily built a relationship with. He's very private with his life, but he was at the charity events. He was there and his presence was different than others, but he was certainly clutch too and was in the middle of a lot of major moments since really the Rangers' last championship. So for you guys, I'd want to hear your piece before we move forward and really get into, kind of the brain side of it. I want to hear what comes from the heart.
Let's hear it.
Steve-O, you're up.
All right, I'll go first. Kreider, to me, when you look back at just childhood moments, I'm going to always remember 2015, Game 5 in Washington, Kreider's game time goal. You want to talk about him in the playoffs against Montreal or Ottawa. I mean, there's just so many moments to me that I'll always remember, looking back on my childhood, and Kreider, if you want to say, if I had to pick a top 10, plays that I remember, Kreider's probably got like 5 or even 6 of those plays. I'm sure you have the Panarin Penguins goal in there, but I mean, going back to the middle school and early high school days, Kreider's got most of those, looking at these moments here on the highlights, so it's just something you'll never forget. And it's a shame, we've spoke about it with almost every single special guest. And Matt, you were big on this, asking them, Kreider, is his number to the rafters? We asked Steve Levy, we asked Arthur Staple, we asked everybody, and everybody's answer was the same. The answer was yes, he is a legend, and it's a shame that he can't finish out his career. It's kind of in a sense, it's like Hank, just at the end of the day, your beloved player, you just couldn't get the job done and give him, what he deserves. And it's sad, but bring out the tissues. But Kreider will always be probably the number 1, if not number 2 Ranger of like my childhood, of our childhood. You go back to our parents, our grandparents, if you're listening to this and ask them, ask your father, who was the number 1 Ranger when you were a kid? For me, it was Kreider. So obviously it's very, very sad to see.
Oh, my king, Christopher James Kreider. What are we going to do without you? No, I think of him a lot along the lines of other great Rangers that New Yorkers loved, but he wasn't, he wasn't the superstar. He wasn't the face of the club. I think of guys along the lines of Steve Vickers, Walkachuk, Ron Greshner. I mean, sure, Adam Graves' number is retired, but I guarantee you, had his number not been retired, he would have been in that category of Ranger. I very much put Chris Kreider in that kind of like he would be in the Rangers Hall of Fame easily, bar none. You know, again, he wasn't the face of the club. I mean, Hank was for a while, then Panarin was, or Igor, whichever one you want to pick. Um, you know, he certainly wasn't like Messier or Rod Gilbert, where he's all time NHLers. But he was one of those guys that just had a special place in everybody's hearts. He was the guy that you would ask people, and they were almost kind of like how I would always say my favorite player was Hank. You know, people would be almost like embarrassed to say, like, yeah, well, my favorite player is like the one that everybody else loves. I love Chris Kreider. You know, that was kind of a running theme with him. And it's great too. It's kind of rare to see a player stick around through two separate eras of a club's history. You know, he made it through the Hank era, and he made it through this like new Panarin kind of sort of era. And it's really cool that he got to be a highlight of both. And it's really cool that for at the end of kind of the Hank era, a lot of people thought that Kreider was going to go, and yet he had basically the best years of his career in this new era. He really reinvented himself, and it's great too that he became kind of like the tip-in king. It was cool that we had him have that moniker. And I mean, as you guys said, he's the core piece of so many great Ranger moments. So I'm really sad to see him go. I kind of thought, kind of in my gut, that he was probably going to go soon. So it didn't sting as much as like when Carl Hagelin got traded, and that was out of the blue, or other guys like that. And I'm glad that he didn't have any of the drama that any of the other guys did this year around him and around the trade. I'm glad that he kind of had his last year. He didn't do great, sadly, but there was no like hatred toward Kreider. There was no hatred with the front office, as far as we know.
Well, I think there was, but I think they settled it.
And like I said, as far as we know, it's probably behind closed doors. But
yeah, and he's a class act.
Yeah, classy guy.
It's part of it too. You know, I do think that some of the trouble with what happened with the Rangers with like some of the moves was I think their reaction was poor last summer. But like Kreider had nothing but good things to say about the organization in any interview he's had since he was traded. So I think that's actually a major step forward for the organization, because I think where the conversation was with Drury, but at the point where they traded probably like Kako to now, that's only been a 3-4 months. That's a major jump, especially with a player that, you know, a lot of fans, he was beloved, like you guys said. So I also think that's actually a good thing, was that it was ugly for a little while, but I think the break itself wasn't, which is a good thing.
So you're saying you're fine with it. Like you agree that Kreider should have won.
All right, Steve-O, man, I know Steve
jumping right in.
Pistols now. I know he's coming from it. I don't think so, but all right. Well, I should state this. I think what we saw this year was certainly his floor, but I have said even on here for a while that if you're going to move a contract, it's probably his. You look at the left wing. You have Lafreniere and Cooley playing right wing. They're off wing because you have too many left wingers. Okay, so there's that. Clearly, his play declined this year, and my feeling is that I don't think at his age, his injuries, he's just going to like rebound from. They didn't sound like, it sounded like there were a plethora of injuries, and we're not talking Chuck. He's 27, right? Like he's going on 33 here. I believe he is 33. 6.5 too. With the cap going up, I think the direction of the team, and from every report, he was sour from the moment Ramsey was fired, or just like abruptly fired. I think it was time. Like, I don't know. I know his heart was always in it, but I just don't know if it was really in it anymore. And I think there were a lot of things that played into that. Now, like Mike said, his like 2012 to 2017 perception, 20 years old to 27, he was like 20 goal scorer, had a high ceiling, came up in clutch moments. Then he signs the contract, and he became the guy. I just don't think at the end of his tenure in New York, Steve-O, that he was the line driver. I think he became not like a complimentary, but I think if the line wasn't performing, he wasn't dragging it with him.
I like that. I like that take. Let's see. I'll come at you from a different angle, and then Mike, you'll be the judge. You'll see who you're back up. Personally, I going off of what Matt just said. I do agree that this isn't a move that's going to destroy you. But with that being said, I just didn't like this move. Putting aside my feelings and my love for Kreider all these years, and I do have an advisement for Chris Drury, and I think for the Rangers organization as a whole, and I would advise them that they have to be careful. And here's why: because we've seen this time and time and again, where the Rangers let go of guys a little too early in their careers, and they go and they blossom elsewhere. Now, obviously, Kreider going on 32, he's not young, but I just don't want to be in a position next year, and I think we definitely can compete as well, 100%. I don't want to be in a position where it's like, you know what, I miss Kreider. We could use a Kreider in this situation. And Matt, your biggest example, Pavel Buchnevich. He's a prime example of one of those guys that the Rangers let go, and now a couple years later, you're like, you know what? He's what we need. He's the piece we need. And I still think Kreider could give you another 1 to 2 more, solid years in the tank. Last year was horrible. I'm not denying that. I was the first one on the pod here to jump in and put Kreider on the pitchfork. But with that being said, this, all is not lost, because this is still a Rangers core that went to 2 conference finals out of the last 3 years. And Kreider was a big piece of that. Who could forget Game 6 in Carolina in round 2? If Kreider doesn't have that performance, we were going to a Game 7, and who knows what could have happened, and that's what Kreider adds to a postseason run. I think he's a piece of a championship team. And from a team perspective, look at it. The Florida Panthers just won another Stanley Cup. They're the Goliath standing in the way moving forward, for anybody in the East. You look at the Leafs, they're about to break up the band. God knows what Washington and New Jersey are going to do next year. You're probably going to see a little regression there. I've been money with these call-outs, so I think you're on the down. So the Rangers are there. They could compete. There is a window there. But with that being said, I think Kreider in the locker room, that piece, I'm seeing a lot of subtractions here on the Rangers side of things. And my advisement for Chris Drury is that you better be right in the way that you use that cap space. If you're going to rebuild, retool this team, whatever, because there is still a window. And if you're not going to allow Chris Kreider to finish his career in New York, you better be right with these moves that's coming next. Mike, how do you feel?
You boys both made great points, and now I'm torn. I think, though, indecision is worse than making the wrong decision. I think if you kept Kreider because you were wishy-washy for another year, and then he had another bad year.
Trouba.
Exactly. So I'm glad that they made a decision. Whether or not it's the right decision, I'm glad that they actually made a decision with him. Did you get really a lot in return? No, but you did get a lot of cap space that they're definitely – I definitely think that the jury is going to go into free agency spending that. I think the biggest thing, and you touched on this very briefly, Steve-O, but going back to the Panthers winning the Stanley Cup, after they won, all you've heard is all of the guys on that team talk about the leadership in the locker room and the culture. Was Chris Kreider a vocal leader on the team? Not really. But you don't always need the most vocal leaders. They can just be a culture guy. And Kreider definitely was a culture guy for the team. Sure, he was more reserved, but when you have a player like that, a veteran on the team like that, it always enhances the experience for these guys, but especially the younger guys. So I think actually out of all of the things that we're losing by losing Kreider, that's the most valuable piece, is that he was a veteran. He was a Ranger, And that to me makes me lean more toward like maybe you shouldn't have traded him, but I just think overwhelmingly all of the other aspects of like, his contract was pretty big for what he was actually producing. You bite the bullet, you get that cap space. It might just be better. And obviously, if he really did have some animosity toward the front office, no matter what it was, and maybe it's best to just get out of that situation, especially after what we're seeing with Rafael Devers and what the hell's going on with the Red Sox. So,
Yeah,
switch of course there, but
you know what? My take here, my take, right? I mean, it's going to be an entire episode of this, but I just think the way I see it, Cope, not actually a Cope, but like his 2025 was very bad. And
for his standards,
regardless of what we think of like injury conversations with the front office, I think that there is the conversation to be had that like, yes, the resume matters, but the business decision is it's a what have you done for me lately world. And for $6.5 million, a logjam on your left wing. I also think in some ways this is a very small factor. Drury has to make a decision on Lafreniere too.
yeah.
And is it really fair that Lafreniere has had to play right wing for his NHL career? I don't think it is. Do I think Lafreniere as a player should be able to adjust? Yes, and we saw that in 24. But he's another player that's his conversation's in the circle. Obviously, other players too, but going back to the logjam, that's part of it. To me, it's 6.5 of cap space. The trade is not about Terrance. It's not about the pick. It's about that cap space. And listen, legacy player, power play 1, penalty kill, clutch, 16 gamer, franchise leader. But listen, we talk about the Panthers. 2010 93, 2 combined goals in the 22 conference final. 24 conference final. So, yeah, Kreider scored that shorty. Panarin scored with garbage time. But at the end of the day, they didn't really get it done then. They didn't get it done in 22 with leads. And listen, like I understand you want to keep those players around. His experience from the Lundqvist time. He's been with this team on the 5 conference final appearance. But I think a team needs 5-on-5 improvement. And I think you can acknowledge that, players probably should have been moved sooner. And I think he's also one of them. He got off the Trouba Kreider contracts. That's 15 mil combined, scot-free. No retention, no sweetener to those tickets. That's nuts. He didn't have to add a first rounder or anything. So I think it is a hard conversation, but I do think if we're laying down the law here, like, I don't think the way Kreider ended his time in New York really guaranteed anything that he'd be returning for the next 2 seasons. And also, if this is a sign of things to come, which, Steve, I know you and I have talked about, Lord, imagine what they'd have to do to get out of that.
Yeah, it has to. Yeah, Drury has to make moves. Again, like I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, you watch Florida winning this cup, and you look. That's what we're aspiring to be. And there's a hole here and a hole there, and before you know it, there's holes everywhere. And there's a lot. This team has a lot to go, and I think, everyone keeps talking. Matt Rempe. Not to sidebar into something else. The Rangers just re-signed him, and everyone's saying, oh, we have a good fourth line. I think the fourth line, in the regular season and the postseason is very different. And I think the Rangers have had a really good fourth line the last few years, and nothing's came of it. I think the fourth line is very overrated in the playoffs. And I think it's just proven that there's more holes on this team that the fourth line is not going to make up for. And I think that's where Drury has to address in this offseason. And I think, again, going back to it, I do agree with the points you made, Matt. On that note, but you look at it, there's only so much you could add in a locker room in one off season, and I think losing Kreider in that locker room is such a big hit, and it's going to be so hard to replace him. But that's why, I said, this is a huge advisement to Jury and the Rangers that you better be right in the way that you spend this cap space. And I don't think you can sit here and grade it, right here as of today on June 18th.
No.
On this episode, we got to see how this offseason plays out. I might be sitting here and say, you know what, with the pieces we added, I forgot Chris Kreider. What team is he on? But it all depends what happens. What's to come?
Yeah, I'll tell you this, Steve. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is that we talk about the 180 in relationship from the Goodrow move exactly a year ago to now. I think about how Kreider, this was a team not on his list. So I think that speaks to the relationship. And I also think that's going to help the Rangers in the offseason because at least the most recent move wasn't bitter. And I think the conversation in league circles was that agents, players alike, and organizations might not want business with the Rangers, especially free agents, if that's the way it was handled. Trouba, Goodrow. So I think that's a really good thing. We kind of went from sour to sweet on that, right? He waives the contract he negotiated so that he could go to a team not on his list. So I think that's a major factor. But Steve, something you mentioned was players coming in that kind of rinse remembering or feeling that we're missing something on this team. This is the one thing I'll say, and this is just evaluation alone. I thought about it. I heard myself echo bike. Based on last year alone, what categories would you put these in? Penalty kill, power play, 5-on-5. Good and bad, or diminishing?
5-on-5 bad. That without a doubt, without an absolute doubt, our 5-on-5 play has been miserable.
I'm talking about Chris Kreider too.
Oh,
alone, right? Like, which is true though. But is he not a part of that conversation?
No, he's absolutely part of that conversation because, granted, yes, he is the tipping king, no doubt. He was gritty in front of the net, which is great. But beyond that, he didn't contribute much 5-on-5. But we always talked about, very briefly, going to bring this up. We always talked about he was not much of the 5-on-5 guy. It should have been everybody else around him, and nobody else did that. That's why it looked poor on him.
Fair.
But, I mean, the fact that we're talking about penalty kill, the fact he became a penalty killer was not expected. It was unexpected. And he was really, really good in that role. And I actually think that helped spark his kind of second half of his career as a Ranger kind of turnaround in this era. And I mean, come on. Power play. He was the tipping king. How could you not love that? As of this year, though,
I'll tell you this, Mike. The only thing I could think of the three topics or three categories that I'd kind of assess him on overall, penalty killing was the only thing that was good in my mind.
Oh, so you wouldn't agree with power play?
I don't think last year he was very good on the power play. And I also think that contributed at the start of the season to the team starting to fall off. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, I don't think from where we're at now, in hindsight, 2020, I don't think anything was saving the team. And his name was in the initial conversation, the message that went to the other managers. So I'm sure that was part of it. But overall, I just think really the most outstanding thing he did last season was penalty kill. And I don't think he had an injury. He explained his injuries, and again, I'm not saying that like these guys aren't playing for injuries or whatnot, but it wasn't like he was playing on a broken leg like Ovechkin.
No, you're right. You're right.
Like hurt back's a long way from the heart. So as harsh as that sounds, I'm just assessing Kreider's 25 year and like even turn of the calendar year. I just feel like it's hard to not acknowledge that he wasn't the same player.
Yeah, I listen. If just talking last year, I think everybody listening to this will agree with you. There's not a single person, Chris Kreider himself, as classy as he is, would probably agree with you that, yeah, you're right. Last year was not good in all those categories. And I do want to agree with you on Matt on the point you made a few minutes ago. Now listen, I obviously disagree. I think Kreider should not have been traded for now. Again, depends what we do. But I do agree with the point you made that if you were going to trade him, I agree with you that you probably should have traded him sooner, meaning that your return probably would have been a little bit better. Now the return really was for cap space, but if you wanted something a little bit better, I think you could have got a little bit of a better return in the offs or in the at the trade deadline for a team. Look at Marshawn just went. I'm sure a team would have loved to pick up Kreider, a Western Conference team. I think you could have got a better return, but it is what it is. Can't change that.
You're not wrong there, Steve-O. I feel like if he was gone at the trade deadline, you're right. Someone would over. I mean, hell, look at Tampa Bay. They always overpay for whoever they bring in. So the other Rangers graveyard, Tampa Bay. Although actually, it's not a graveyard. They won cups with our guys. But yeah, no, I agree with you on that. Maybe the trade deadline would have been better, or maybe even like this year at the draft. We always talk. Everybody always talks about draft day trades. They like rarely happen anymore.
They never happen.
Yeah,
but at the very least, maybe it would have been an idea to maybe entice some other club to get something more out of them. But
who do you think would have picked him up? Somebody like a Winnipeg at the deadline?
Probably Winnipeg. I don't think Dallas would have. I think Dallas was too low.
No, I don't think. Maybe Vegas, but I don't know. I have to look at their cap. But I thought,
Vegas.
Imagine Kreider on Winnipeg. I
well, like look at Vegas's cap. What are you talking about? They circumvent the cap every year at the trade deadline.
Yeah, they are truly wizards with that.
Yeah, so I don't think that would have mattered.
All right, here's my thinking voice too. Speaking of which, I'd like to acknowledge this because I think this is fair too. Chris Drury came to this decision that it wasn't good enough, like the team, and in Kreider's case too. Too late, too clumsy, just brutal, right? We can acknowledge that. But I also think you have to look at it and in turn, like there are pros and cons. I don't think it's all, water in one bucket and not the other. He moved 9 roster players, but you're getting 15 million cap space. And all of the reports are that he is aggressive. All of the reports are that the team is willing to take flyers on what are those? Drawing a blank here.
Offer sheets?
Offer sheets. I mean, we hear it with Paterka. We've heard it all week. But not only him, it's a fear of other organizations that the Rangers can offer sheet because, in the words of Friedman, they can poison pill. I love that quote. Like, they can add signing bonuses that no one else can. And that's why the hot dogs at MSG cost $20 friggin' dollars. Like, this is why. So I think, Steve, I actually really respect your opinion because at the end of the day, it really is going to come down to like, who do they use? Who do they acquire with that money? And we saw like when he made space with Buchnevich, now in turn, it was because they were after Eichel. It was because they wanted to open up a spot for Loff and Kako. But the players he picked up are all not Rangers anymore in 2021. So you look at the times he's had cap space and you hope that he's learned from that. And, not learn like this is what I should do now based on then, but just what to do right now. What is right for the team right now? I don't think anyone has really an answer because the macro conversation is that the two teams we saw in the final are a full Olympic-sized swimming pool lap ahead of everyone, specifically Florida. I think Edmonton's close. I think it's Florida that's like 2 laps ahead, Michael Phelps. And the reality is every team's going to try and match that because they're seeing you. Carolina got railroaded. 4 5-star players that Mike mentioned at the top of the Seppi did not score goals or did not score in an abundance against this team. Like everybody's going to try and match them. And that includes obviously the Rangers and what they do with their cap space. It's a lot of space to utilize, but it's either going to be on one big player or a few impact players. And I also think, Mike, we've talked about this too. Like, where do those league minimum guys come in and maybe make an impact for the Rangers? Where do those bigger ticket guys come in and make an impact? Like, there's a lot of question marks, Steve. And I like what you said before too, Steve-O. Like, there's a lot of holes. The D is going to need a complete redo. And with that, with the reconstruction, does that give you enough money to get another impact forward? I don't know. But I mean, there's 2 weeks on the clock now.
Yeah.
Jeez, you just posed so many questions there, Matt. Where do we want to start, Steve? Oh, by the way, I need a haircut so badly.
I like the long flow.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. No, you know what? And also, you're talking about the Olympic-sized swimming pool between Florida and Edmonton and everybody else. I also think that in roster build, those two teams in the Cup final were vastly different from each other. Yes, Edmonton had a lot of grit, but they were incredibly top-heavy. Their names being McDavid and Draisaitl.
Two best players in the world.
Yeah, I think they really showed that, like, that kind of narrative of you don't need a good goalie to win the Stanley Cup is kind of dead. Like, you got to have good goaltending. Besides that point, though, this team really needs to, like you say, redo the defense because, you look at Edmonton's defense did not match up. Florida's defense doesn't really have gigantic names. Sure, they have Ekblad. Sure, they have Seth Jones. But they're not like – you're not saying, oh, my God, Gustav Forsling on any other team. But on the Florida Panthers, you're saying, oh, God, Gustav Forsling, because they're just so sound defensively. And this Rangers team is far from it. I mean, we've lost Trouba. We've lost Lindgren. Probably going to lose Miller. Maybe. We can talk about that too.
I think he's a 99.9 gone.
Yeah, probably gone. So who do you have left over? Fox?
Susie, who's also been mentioned in trade talks. Schneider, Jones, and there was a report last week, not sure how valid it is, that, Jones' camp was in conversation. So, I mean, but again, that's still how many remaining guys, right?
I don't know if I'll be honest. I don't know if I see Keandre Miller getting moved. I really don't.
Oh, elaborate on that, Steve.
Yeah, elaborate, Steve-O.
It could be a hot. I know all the reports coming out, but I mean, it's just take Keandre Miller out. I mean, it's just there's nobody. I mean, this is an AHL defense. I mean, it's so piss poor weak. So I don't know if they might, but I don't know, man. I mean, it's just
Vakanainen's returning, Steve. So
that's great. The hell's he'll slot right in.
Real talk. Miller is going because he's going to get offer sheeted, and if he's offer sheeted, the Rangers lose him for nothing.
True.
Or there's a compensation. So, like, I just think they have to move him because they have to have the leverage. You can't just let him go.
That's true.
I mean, unless they're good with like a second round pick in compensation.
And I'm just telling you, they're not going to let that happen.
Depends on what Drury's thinking. Because really, I think the whole crux of all of the offseason talk is, what's the goal? What's the plan? I know we talked about this way back in the season funeral epic, but like, what is the goal for this offseason? What is the plan? And
because you mentioned that nine roster players were moved. I mean, if you think about it, the Rangers rebuild itself, I think, was less roster moves overall.
Right. Yeah, because think about it. It was McDonough, JT Miller, Rick Nash, Nick Holden,
Grabner,
Zuccarello, Hayes.
Oh, but Zook was also 2019. He was the next year.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, they were part of the rebuild. Like, those trades were part of the rebuild.
That's fair.
Yeah, but I mean, you're right.
That in that time span, there was less movement.
There was a lot less movement. Damn.
And then obviously subsequent moves happen, like Shea for the Schneider pick, but overall, I just think that's perplexing because when you talk about what's the goal, what's the vision, like, this is the time. Like you're saying, like, there were less moves when the team committed to season ticket holders. That was a time though where like JD and Gordon were sending out letters like that like once a week, man. It was like Tom Wilson, they were sending out a letter. Like we don't get any of that now. But yeah, you know what? I still have so much to talk about with you guys that I want to pick your brain. Here's where I think, like, I don't think this team's a cup contender even after July 1st or whatever the
No.
subsequent moves are. But I will say, staying on business, like they are in a better spot. They, I think, are already in a better spot than they were at the end of the season.
Well, yeah, I'd say because they cleaned out a lot of the drama. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, I think the only player left that was any target of criticism, major criticism, is Zibanejad. And like you're saying, according to Brooks's report, I mean, he might want out too.
No, there was the latest was that his wife in a Swedish paper was like talking about all the reasons why they like wouldn't.
Oh, great. More
So,
drama. Great.
yeah. Well, think about it. I mean, and listen, I'm not even saying this to stir, to stir the tea, but Arthur Staple leaving the Athletic, like he was a major inside with the Rangers. Really, I think Brooks is like he's got whoever he's got, man, is like he's got the elite connection. But but like otherwise, like Molly doesn't like break news. She doesn't have to because she's with Brooks. But like Staple was another one of those guys that got a lot of inside. And
Friend of the pod, Arthur
friend of
Staple.
the pod. But
Remember what I said when you broke the news that he was leaving? I was like, great. Now what am I going to read on the Athletic?
yeah.
He's like the only thing I read on there.
But yeah, no, seriously, when we talk about like information, it's also I do feel that some of the reports in New York, maybe it was in response to the way the year went. Like we haven't really heard a lot.
No.
We've gotten information from like top insiders and like some nuggets here and there, but like I feel like it's been a lot of contradicting the last few weeks.
I agree. I feel like it's been that all season.
Yeah, you're right. It's crazy how we went from like under Sather, you heard nothing. Then we went to Gordon and Davidson, and they had like a press conference when Buchnevich and Chesterton got in that car accident. They're sending letters about players. They're sending letters about the direction of the team. And now under Drury, it's like we get no information again. It's quite jarring.
All right, boys, I got a question. Bringing it back to Chris Kreider, number 20. I think he needed a cup to do it.
Whoa.
But does his jersey get retired?
No. I put him in the same category, like I said, as like Vickers, Greshner, who else did I say? Walt Kachuk. Like they're all timers, but like Graves would not get his number in the Raptors if he didn't win the cup and also have 50 goals that season. I don't think Chris Kreider goes in the Raptors. I'm also one of those people that considers like number retiring like sacred. Like you got to be.
No, you do. You do consider it sacred.
Yeah, no, I do consider it.
Yeah.
I do consider it. I consider it. You have to be extraordinary for the club. You don't even have to win a championship. I mean, look at Hank. I'm perfectly fine with Hank going up there because he was extraordinary. I don't think Chris Kreider was extraordinary. As much as I love him, he just wasn't Rod Gilbert or Jean Rattel or Andy Bathgate or hell, even the guys going all the way back that nobody ever talks about, like Bill Cook.
Yeah, and frankly, like Lundqvist holds records for the club and the league.
Yeah.
On a team or in an organization, and it's 100th season coming up, that is goaltender. Like the Rangers never really had a prolific forward. And it's not a slight to what Kreider's done in his career, and he has an incredible legacy. But this is not a team where it's McDavid and he's batting down Tikkanen, Curry, Gretzky records where you're like, or even Glenn Anderson, Mark Messier. Like the Edmonton Oilers had a forward group in the 80s that was like, you pick apart those guys and put them in every generation, they're probably one of the best players in every generation, right?
Yeah.
Now, again, whole other conversation, tangent, but point being, like the Rangers, I'm not saying that it's not incredible what he did, but I mean,
you look at the names on the list, like you're saying, the records that he was breaking, like he tied Camille Henry in power play goals. Camille Henry's in the exact same category of Ranger as he was. He was like the Chris Kreider. Say it again.
Camille the Eel.
Camille the Eel. He was like Chris Kreider in the 50s to Andy Batgate and Harry Howell, like all-time Rangers dog. But like, ask anybody outside of the Rangers about Camille Henry. Who would know? Who would know about Camille Henry? You know, Sam Rosen would be like, Camille the Eel.
Steve-O, what do you think?
Yeah, you've been quiet over there, Steve-O.
It's tough. I'm thinking. I feel like we got to revisit this conversation at some point when the season starts next year. But right now, I'm going to say yes. I do think his number should be retired. You know, I think this is something that I was very strongly about in
Speak your truth, Steve-O.
in the season. And you know, just because he got traded now, that doesn't erase everything that he's done in the past. You know, he's still one of the most talented hockey players, you know, that I've ever seen, you know, play. And I think his statistics alone with this franchise should be enough to get him up in the rafters. You know, whether you want to go up and down the lineup of all the clutch moments, you know, the Game 6 hat trick against Carolina, 2015, saving the Rangers in the final seconds, down 3-1. To get that game to overtime, the Rangers would win that series. You know, I could give you 1,000 moments. But then not even that, you know, to be the Rangers all-time leader in playoff goals, you know, having the most game-winning playoff goals, you know.
Most games played in the playoffs.
Exactly.
Too.
I don't have all the stats in front of me, but I think the stats alone, I think they solidify him and his spot in the rafters and what he's meant to this franchise. I agree with you, Mike. I don't think you have to win a Stanley Cup in order to get your number of retirement. There's all across sports, there's 1,000 examples that highlight that point. But I also think, we have to see what happens. You know, we have to see what happens. You know, maybe the Ducks trade him and he goes to, you know, I don't know, Tampa. And Tampa wins a cup, and I'm like, yeah, who knows, you know? But as of right now, I say yes. I say that he should be in the rafters.
Okay, now that you said that, Steve-O, like now I strongly disagree with you.
You know what's worse to think about? I was thinking about that the other day too. Like the Rangers will move Miller, and it's not the team that he initially goes to. Because something I take note, folks, Kako Kraken. By the way, Kraken, Kako, sick nickname. Trouba, Anaheim, Kreider, Anaheim, Vetrano, Anaheim. Strome signed there. I guess Vetrano signed there, right? Yeah, he wasn't traded. Yeah. Andrew Kopp signed in Detroit. Like a lot of these guys have left. My ultimate fear, which I know this is in this, I will plant the seed if it hasn't been in anyone's noggin already, is that one of these guys comes back to the division.
It's a good chance. How about maybe not the division, but the conference for sure? I mean, you look at the Ducks. The Ducks have been shit for the last few years. They haven't given you much evidence that they're going to be good this year. They may look to sell a piece like Kreider at the deadline to get some more draft capital. So it's definitely a possibility. So I do agree. That's why,
I think the Ducks are all in. I think the Ducks are going for Marner, and not only Marner, I think they're going to go for Marner and Tavares.
They could have Marner as long as
it would be just our luck. Somehow, some way, the Rangers and the Ducks are going to meet in the Stanley Cup final, and we're going to have to play Kreider and Trouba and Strome, Trano, and hell, throw Miller on that team too. Why the hell not?
Steve-O, Mike and I were joking last night. I was like, McDavid, they were talking on the broadcast about McDavid's contract being up next year. I was like, he'll come to New York and we'll play Edmonton to a 7-game overtime in the Cup final. And Draisaitl's going to have like 14 goals in the series and kill us.
Yeah, that would be so New York. Were you guys having this conversation last night?
Yeah, last night.
That's so funny because I was literally thinking about McDavid coming to the Rangers last night. We could dream, right? Why not?
Listen, we got the cap space now.
And man, we've seen, I know it sounds so fictional. I think almost childish. but like we've seen a lot of moves in recent years that were unprecedented. So I'm not going to say with McDavid alone, but guys, I think the conversation right now with the cap and the cap space is that ownership groups are looking at cap percentage in the new way. And the agents are looking at cap percentage based on the 80 mil cap. I think it's going to change a lot of the league's dynamics, and I think we're going to see a lot of movement. And July 1st is coming up. We're recording this June 18th. Draft's coming up July 1st. Like, I think what the Rangers do now is the season. And I just Mike could tell Steve-O, you too. You know me long enough. You know I despise, and we know this because we even fell for the Nashville in the summer. But I think with this might be one team, and we've seen it before, but this might be one team that like what they do is going to determine the season for them tenfold. Like I think this might be the most I felt about a team like that outside of the Rangers too.
So you're saying like how we've seen teams that people say win the offseason like Nashville, or that one time when Devils fans thought they won the offseason when clearly we did.
1920, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Panarin versus Gusev.
Yeah.
And who was it? Fox versus Subban. Yeah. But no, I agree with you. I think this is one of the rare moments where a team or the offseason will make or break a team. But also don't forget that we don't know what the trade deadline could end up looking like next year as well. Yeah. Basically, the point is there are going to be a lot of moves in the next 6 months, 6, 7, 8. Oh God, 9 months. But
you don't change the chemistry of your team at the deadline.
I agree with you, Matt. I agree. I think
you add if they're in a position to add, they'll add.
Exactly.
But if they start the way like if they fall off in the start of the season again, like you're not making a trade deadline move.
Unless you're subtracting and you're just like, all right, this isn't working, just trade everybody away. The Rangers did that before in our lifetime.
I'd like to mention, since we're talking about this right now too, because Steve-O, I think we're on the same wave with this. You have a lot of the same players still. Like you still like, unless there's a radical change, like Panarin is still a blue shirt. Schneider is still a blue shirt. Loff is still a blue shirt. And these are guys that there's like no guarantees around them, but we know that their ceiling's high. And we know that maybe the change Mike Sullivan coming in, like maybe he speaks to Lafreniere. Maybe he gets him back checking way more. Maybe he gets Schneider playing in that top 4, top 2 position that we've seen at inconsistent times. And I think Panarin is like he's going to produce. It's a matter of if this team makes the playoffs and what he can do there. And I also feel like he's kind of the stone that he's cut into is like pretty much solidifying on in terms of his playoff performances. But I digress. Point being, I want to hear from you guys what you think about like the remaining roster. We've talked about all year about players that have left, including Kreider all episode. What do you guys think about what remains? Because if you look through the lineup, it also doesn't feel like a lot of these players left, which is surprising.
Yeah, you still have your core pieces in there. You have Igor, and again, he's a big percentage of that. And you still have Fox, you have Mika, you have Trocheck, you have Panarin, throwing their JT on a full year. I mean, you still have a lot of pieces in there. And I really like the point you mentioned about Nashville, about us falling for the trap. They go out there, they get all these new toys, but they had no recipe. They just threw a whole bunch of ingredients into something, and it didn't turn out. Rangers are different than that. I think the Rangers right now, the Rangers have a solid recipe. You go out there, you get Mike Sullivan to come in there, you get a new vision. Let's see what he could do. And the Rangers have some ingredients, and I feel like they just need to add the right ingredients and put together. I mean, they are the complete opposite of what Nashville was last year. I mean, this is again a team. I said this before. This is a team that I fully expect to be back in the playoffs. I'm not talking Stanley Cup, but we could definitely be in the playoffs for sure. I mean, I mentioned Toronto's about to go through a breakup. You just give a whole wide, review of this East, there's a lot of teams. You look at Boston's probably not going to be competitive. Philly, Islanders, a lot of teams that are going to be bottom feeders. Again, the Rangers have an opportunity there. They have a vision. You have a full year of JT. The core is still there. You got to get Vinny back on track. Panarin's, you know what you're getting in Panarin in the regular season. They just got to add the right pieces. And for me, most of those pieces are going to come defensively.
Well, looking at the roster right now, as you're saying, Steve-O, they definitely have ingredients. They just need a chef to put it together, and I hope that Mike Sullivan is, because like you said, you have your core pieces: Lop, Trocheck, Panarin. Even now, JT Miller's a part of that. Mika Zibanejad, and then you also have young guys: Will Cooley, Gabe Perreault, Adam Edstrom, Matt Rempe. Offman might come up as well. So there's something there, especially in the forward group. There's something there. It honestly though, the defense. Oh, the lordy lord. Yeah, Fox. Okay, he has to step it up. Carson Soucy left a lot to be desired. Who the hell knows what the hell is going to happen with Keandre Miller? Will Borgen was a solid piece. Definitely, let's see if Mike Sullivan can pull something out of him, because Mike Sullivan is good with pulling stuff out of defensemen. Braden Schneider, but fucking Heinen. Oh.
Yeah, but Schneider was out, right? He was listed as out last time on DFL.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
You mentioned Offman, Perreault. I think where the trouble is with this roster too is, and I know this is said with not maybe the most credibility, but Offman and Perreault did not come into the league lighting the world on fire. And I think that's also what is frustrating, because in 2023, it was like, okay, there's a little bit of an unknown with Kako, Loft, Heedle, like, let's see where they could take. Now they had more experience in the NHL, far more. But in terms of you have the players you're counting on, there are question marks around. Fox, Mika, in the center of that. And then you also have guys that are like is Perreault going to give us like 80 points, or is he going to give us like 30 and just, this is going to be a growing pain season? I think that's a major factor in all this too.
Don't forget Brett Berard too. I forgot about him.
Yeah, but you know what? I mentioned, what do the NYR need? Defense, center depth, organizational center depth, and right wingers, natural right wingers. So you just moved a left winger, and that kind of that was the position that you least need, and now that gives Berard an opportunity on your third line. I really liked Brett Berard.
I really did too.
I like to see him in an 82 games.
Providence Friar, baby.
I would like to see him in a full season too. I think we all agree. How about this? Something we don't want to see. I think all three of us could agree. Is that we don't want to see Mitch Marner in a jersey.
No, absolutely. I know we probably would have gotten to that, but we need to jump on that right now. No, Mitch Marner, absolutely not. I do not. For the listeners out there, he has less playoff goals than Rick Nash did as a Ranger. That is disturbing. I'm sorry, I don't want to go on a rant.
Well, no time to go back and erase the rant now, but that is true. And I think it's like it feels like the one thing in sports, when an organization makes the right move, you say, like, how did no one else see that one? Like the Tkachuk trade. Now, granted, that was a blockbuster, but I mean, I personally thought he was a game changer before he went to Florida.
Me too.
But Mitch Marner, just like any team that signs him, like, he really just seems like a player that you know what you're signing up for.
No doubt he's a great player. No doubt. But he cannot produce when it matters. Literally
not in this economy either, man. Like, against teams like Florida.
No. The only clutch goal I saw him have was in Four Nations. That's it. I've literally never seen him have a clutch goal. And you cannot get rid of Chris Kreider, who was clutch for us for how many years, and replace him with someone who's just going to disappear in the playoffs.
I agree.
Also, like, you freed up $15 million. you're going to sign one player, and it's just I don't think
No.
it's going to happen. The team has too many needs.
I agree. I don't think it's going to happen, but just because I don't want it to happen so bad, there's always that slim percentage where it's like, you know.
I know somehow, some way it'll come back and bite me in the ass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know. You know, the word is that Anaheim's playing that heavy, which would be so funny too. Like literally there's like 10 former Rangers on the Ducks, and then there's two like pretty much Rangers on the Ducks, and it's Mitch Marner and Trevor Zegras. Anytime Marner was like maybe available, it was like Mitch Marner to New York, Trevor Zegras to New York, Trevor Zegras to New York.
Always Trevor Zegras to New York, and that
Yeah,
pissed
it's like
you off.
it's just so funny. But Steve-O, I mean, what were you gonna say,
I
brother?
want to say to you guys and everybody out there listening that I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I don't think it's hit me yet how different next year is going to be. No Sam, no Joe, no Kreider. I mean, it's one of those things that it's not going to hit you until you're sitting there game one watching.
Are you trying to kill me, Steve-O? Are you just trying to
I'm
put
trying
me
to prep you.
Finally, the sun came out today, and you're trying to make me depressed again. Come on.
Steve-O, you know what it's gonna hit me in like game 32 in December at Detroit at an obscure time in the
At a
afternoon, like
4-1
evening
loss.
afternoon. Yeah, and it's gonna be like, damn, like this is where Sam and Joe carried, bro. You know? Like this is where they carried.
Yeah. Well, speaking of
This moment.
carrying, Puck Talk CS is going to carry you all through the off season. Before we wrap up, Mike, Matt, any final thoughts?
Oh, geez. Final thoughts?
I don't have final thoughts because we're gonna have a lot coming out soon between the
Yeah.
draft and
True.
the free agency, which I'm sure is gonna be banana lands for us. So until next time for me, guys.
Yeah, ditto to that.
Alrighty. Kiddo to that. You heard it here. Stay tuned. And always remember, it's just the luck of the puck.